Hey class, I wanted to make a little bit video for y'all. I probably won't do this for every single chapter, but I think for chapter 3 especially, I wanted to hit on the highlights so you guys can have some further study material. I'm looking at chapter 3, the concept chat, that's page 106, so y'all can feel free to follow along. I'm just going to hit the high points. Chapter 3 is a lot of material. It's the biological basis of behavior, which pretty much means all things nervous system. As you guys read about, the nervous system is divided into two specific sections, right? So we have the central nervous system and we have the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system includes the brain and spinal cord. It's like the OG groups right there, where the peripheral nervous system are all the nerves on the periphery of the brain and spinal cord. And that is further broken down into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So listen, write this down, look at the book, get used to separating those two because it's really important to know which goes where. So for the first, we have the central nervous system. That's the big old brain, and that's the spinal cord, right? Chapter 3 really breaks down the different areas of the brain, the hind brain, the forebrain, the midbrain. It talks about the different sections and what they're each responsible for. It talks about how even within the specific parts of the brain, the lobes and their function. I would like for you guys to know an overarching view of that. And so, for example, you guys need to know how the frontal lobes are primarily responsible in decision making, right? They also help us move, right? That large motor movement. The occipital lobes, right, in the very back, that's for seeing. And then we have the temporal lobes, right? That's mainly responsible for hearing. That's kind of hopefully easy to remember because the temporal lobes are on the sides of our head, the sides of our brain. That's the one closest to our ears. So that might be a helpful thing to remember. Parietal lobes, they're primarily responsible for the somatosensory cortex. We're going to get into that when we further break down the peripheral nervous system. So don't necessarily worry about that now. Those are all housed in the forebrain. So forebrain is the very large frontal section of the brain, and all the lobes are divided among there. What you guys also need to know a lot about, well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so we'll stick with the nervous system. So that's a little bit of an overarching view of the brain, right? The spinal cord is certainly also developed or is sectioned out as well into different parts. Transitioning to the peripheral nervous system, guys, the brain and spinal cord, remember, those are central nervous system. Those are the central features of the nervous system. Whereas the peripheral nervous system are all things on the periphery of that. That's the peripheral nerves, and the related functions and glands. So the PNS is what we usually refer to that as, is further divided into the somatic and then the autonomic, right? The somatic, right? Soma in Latin, I believe, can translate to body. So when you think of the somatic nervous system, I want you to think of the body, the large muscle body movements. Those are voluntary, all right? So that's me saying I want to pick up my hand to raise my hand to answer Professor Hannah's question, right? I want to do that. So I'm telling my brain to send a message to my spine to send a message to the related nerve that is responsible for lifting my hand. So that would be the somatic nerve system's function right there. And the related sensory receptors as well. It's like I lift my hand up and I feel the wind against my hand. That's what I'm talking about. And then the second part, we have the autonomic. So autonomic is auto, it's automatic. We don't have to necessarily control that. And so those are the nerves that go directly to our hearts, our blood vessels. It's responsible for digestion, things that, again, we can't say in our head, oh, I'm going to control this. Let me, turn my stomach on to digest my food. No, it does it automatically for us. Chapter 3, the concept chat, it breaks down the brain and behavior. Y'all be sure to be a little bit familiar with that. I think y'all just reading over that and focusing on it will really be helpful. really make sure you know the limbic system, the hypothalamus, and then the parts of the lobes. That's really what I'm going to quiz you guys over, because those are super duper important. Understand that the brain is further divided in how we study, talking about the left and right hemisphere. So the left hemisphere usually focuses on language, speech, reading, kind of artsy stuff, writing. Whereas if I say I'm more right brain, that means I'm more of a spatial thinker. That usually helps me be able to recognize and see patterns that may not necessarily be there. It's also deals with nonverbal communication too. So that's kind of a large um, definition of the two. We certainly don't refer to it as just right brain or left brain. However, that is a little bit of the separation. Your book gets a lot into the evolutionary basis of behavior. I think those are very important. You will be quizzed over that for sure. The different definitions about fitness, adaptation, survival of the fittest, those types of things. Because in regards to behavior, we usually focus on the use it or lose it rule and mentality. That if an organism is functioning properly, if it's thriving, then the behaviors that help it thrive will stay, whereas the behaviors and decisions that aren't helping me survive, those are going to be done away with. So you will read about that. You're going to read about adaptive traits and how different organisms have to adapt differently to their environment. I usually use that example a lot, especially in therapy when we talk about ways of living and trauma, especially because I can get used to living in the North Pole for several years and it actually literally changes my genetic structure. Living somewhere, especially generationally, where if you pick me up and move me to Hawaii, that's going to be super great, but I'm also going to not be really thriving right away. It's going to take some time for me to adjust. And so just like evolutionarily these principles apply, it also is mentally there too. I'll hold off on that till we get to some of the mental health chapters. Look over the applications. I'm certainly going to quiz you guys over that. I want to hear some of your thoughts on that. And then lastly, with the endocrine system, super duper important, guys. We are extremely hormonal creatures, doesn't matter what age you are. And understanding the function of hormones is very, very important. In order to do that, you guys also need to understand how the neuron communicates and transmits those hormones with each other neurons. So the main parts of the neuron, we have the dendrites, right, which receive the signals from other cells. They receive it and they pass it along to the cell body. That's also called the soma, right? And then in the soma, it passes into the axon, which carries that electrical impulse all the way to the other cell, and it transmits that specifically through the I'm blanking on the name, guys, excuse me, not the terminal buttons, the gap. It's something gap that's responsible for receiving that. So anyways, my apologies for blanking on that. I'm gonna see if I can flip to it real quick before I move on. Regardless, these neurotransmitters, guys, the synaptic cleft, I'm sorry, that's exactly what I was thinking. So it transmits that, and then that's where the neurotransmitters can be transferred to the dendrite of another cell, and it can be carried down the line. So read over how the process is done, action potential, what's involved with that. And then also, and I mentioned this a second ago, the neurotransmitters, you don't have to know exactly what they're 100% responsible for, but I would like for you to know kind of overarching. And page 73 gives a really good breakdown of it and the associated diseases, especially with GABA, right? So GABA is a neurotransmitter that is primarily responsible for anxiety and anxiety-related disorders. So if you ever experience anxiety, if you know someone with anxiety, which I think we all do, if we don't ourselves experience it, that can also be helpful to know, because a lot of medications can target that if we are on some type of anti-anxiety medicine. So that's a little bit of the high-arching view of chapter 3. Chapter 4 is a lot, guys, so go easy on yourself. Take your time reviewing it. I don't think it's going to be super helpful for me to break it down because it's really just a lot of definitions. What I really care about that you guys know for chapter 4 is that you can break down and know the five senses and know the primary responsibilities and the associated functions of all of them: the taste, smell, touch, hearing, and seeing, right? So all of those have specific receptors, specific cells. I don't need you guys to know all of them, so don't stress yourself out with that, but just know the general view. Uh, and kind of what can happen when those go awry, because the book talks about that too. So that's really it, guys. That's chapter 4. Know the pathways, the visual pathways, especially look at these graphs and definitely look at the application. I think that's really helpful for learning. And if you guys have any other questions at all, just reach out to me. Thanks so much.